You could walk away. Why do you fight them?
Because I am tired of running from the man I was.
They sold her as trophy stock, until a former cavalryman risked everything to save her. Red dust swirled on the trail, a harbinger of the storm to come in the year 1885, Arizona. My name is Ethan Cole. Once a cavalryman, I'm now just a survivor with a scar under my eye. I've grown accustomed to solitude and have learned not to trust anyone. But then, an unusual sound broke the silence, a faint cry from a narrow canyon. A overturned wagon, a bound woman, and a group of bandits. I knew I should keep walking, but instead, I tightened my grip on my rifle and headed toward the trouble that awaited. The desert made sure no one forgot. Heat rolled off the flats like a punishment, waves of air bending the horizon until even your own shadow looked like it wanted to run. Creosote stung the wind, and far off a hawk screamed the way coffin nails scream when they're hammered crooked. The land had a way of peeling men down to the worst truths they carried, and I had enough truths to fill a graveyard. It was there, in a dry wash knifing through red stone, that I found them. 3 wagons. A dozen men with the hollow eyes of gamblers who had already lost too much. Mules lathered white, and a girl, no, hardly more than 17, bound at the wrists and ankles with rawhide, her cheek pressed into the grit. Apache, Chiricahua, by the beadwork at her collar, by the bone comb in her dark hair. She held her chin high despite the tremor in her shoulders. She was terrified, but she would rather die standing inside herself than beg on her knees. The one doing the talking wore a hatband made of silver dollars, each one drilled and tarnished by sweat. His name was Silas McGraw, if the wanted circulars I had seen in Globe were to be believed. He yanked the girl up by the rope and tilted her chin like she was a mule he meant to sell. "Fresh stock," he crowed. "Spirited." His men laughed the way men laugh when they think cruelty is just another form of coin. I should have kept walking. Every sensible mile in me said so. But my boots stopped in the mesquite's shadow, and my heart answered a different call, one that sounded a lot like the screams of the people I'd ridden against years before, when orders told me to burn and not to think. I stepped out. "Afternoon, boys," I said, as if I had stumbled onto a friendly camp. "Storm's riding down from the dragoons. You'll want higher ground before night." McGraw's eyes pinned me. "Who the hell are you?" "Name's Cole." My voice was flat as the horizon. "Doesn't matter. What do you want, Cole?" His hand slid to the butt of a Navy revolver like a snake curling in grass. I let the silence ride a moment, then spoke. "The girl." Laughter broke open again. The girl didn't flinch. She looked past them, past me, into a distance none of us could see. She had the eyes of someone who already understood men like McGraw, and who knew that mercy didn't often wear spurs. "Name your bid," McGraw said finally, amusement thick as tar. I patted the bay mare that had carried me from Pecos to Prescott, across rivers swollen with death and deserts stripped to bone. She was the only creature that had chosen me again and again when everything else turned its back. My throat tightened. "My horse," I said. "My Colt, the Winchester in my bedroll, and every live round I've got left." The laughter died. Greed replaced it. McGraw spat into the dust. "That bay's worth 3 men's wages. Throw in your canteen." "Both," I said, "but you keep your hands off her." He considered, then barked a laugh sharp as glass. "Done." They hauled the girl up like she was nothing but cargo. I surrendered my steel, my mare, my water, everything a man in this country needs to stay breathing. They tossed me a dull butcher knife, mockery carved into its edge. I cut the rawhide binding her ankles, then her wrists. The rope fell in a circle between us like a snake's shed skin. Her eyes found mine, black, bright, and unbroken. "You traded what keeps a man alive," she said, her English steady, her voice carrying the low rhythm of her people. "Why?" "Because I was done living with ghosts. Because I had burned enough homes and buried enough apologies to last 3 lifetimes. Because sometimes the only way to begin again is to lose what you love most." I didn't say any of that. I only said, "Because I could." She gave no thanks, only the barest tilt of her head, as if to say the reckoning between us wasn't over. McGraw mounted his mule, gave me a mock salute, and rattled off with his wagons. The dust they left behind felt colder than shade. The girl steadied herself, though her legs were untrustworthy from days of binding. "Nayeli," she said at last, her name falling like water across stone. "Ethan," I answered. "You gave away your horse, your gun, your water." Her voice was flat. "Men who do that are already dead." "Maybe," I said, "but sometimes it's the dead who walk truest." Vet. We moved north, the storm cutting the sky into white seams. Lightning cracked far off, a sound like God remembering something he'd rather forget. Nayeli walked silent, her wrists red from the rawhide, her braid heavy with dust. She didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of her judgment with every step. By the time we reached the bluff where an old prospector had dug a den, the rain came down in fists. I shouldered the rock door inward and lit a stub of tallow. The den smelled of ambition long dead and smoke long gone. I set water to heat, laid down the salve I carried, and told her she could wash. She took the tin from my hands without a word, her eyes sharp as flint. "Turn your face away," she said. I did. The sound of water against skin was softer than the thunder overhead, but it struck deeper. My hands trembled once. I pressed them flat to my knees. When she laid her hand on my shoulder, it was dry, sure. "Thank you," she said. "Not for me, for you. You are trying to change." I couldn't answer. Outside, the storm dragged its anger across the desert. Inside, I felt the first fragile thread of something I had not earned trust. And trust, in a land like this, was rarer than rain. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away. And if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. Morning came pale and bruised, as though the desert sky itself had taken a beating in the night. I woke to the sound of Nayeli moving quiet in the prospector's den, her steps light but certain, like someone raised to slip through shadows without stirring them. She had bound her rope-burned wrists with my old bandana. The blue faded near white, and for a strange moment it looked like the cavalry colors I'd once worn, except this time it was wrapped around someone I had no right to protect, and yet could not stop myself from trying. I brewed the last grounds of coffee, the bitter smell curling up like regret. She refused it, choosing water instead, and I wondered how many times she'd seen men sip fire and call it courage. Outside, the desert looked washed, rinsed clean by the storm, though I knew it only meant tracks would stand out sharper. Somewhere beyond those ridges, McGraw's men would be gathering their anger into saddlebags, tightening cinches with the promise of reclaiming what they believed was theirs. Nayeli watched me with that still, unblinking gaze of hers. "They will come," she said. "They might," I answered. "Number they will." Her voice carried no doubt, only the certainty of someone whose people had been hunted long enough to know the rhythm of pursuit. Men like that do not give up what they claim. I nodded, unable to argue. She was right. McGraw's kind never left empty-handed, not if they had lead to spend and horses to ride. The desert was wide, but vengeance always found a trail. We moved north, leaving the den behind. Without my mare, each mile dug into my legs like a confession. The sun climbed higher, merciless, bleaching the rocks until the whole land looked flayed. Nayeli never complained, never slowed more than a heartbeat. She carried her pain the way a soldier carries a flag close, hidden, but visible to anyone who knew where to look. By midday we came upon a cedar thicket, low and stubborn against the wind. The air smelled of sap, sharp and clean. We stopped there, drinking sparingly. I offered jerky. She shook her head. "My people hunt for food, not for salt meat," she said. "But I will take some. Hunger is louder than pride." Her honesty struck me harder than the words. I gave her the strip, watched her chew slow, each bite an act of endurance. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only acknowledgement, as if we were two strangers bound by the same storm rather than allies. Hours later, the land opened wide into red hills, scarred with ancient water runs. Nayeli touched my arm and pointed toward a narrow cut, stone walls rising sheer. "There," she said, "a place where men think they can pass 2 by 2, but only one can." You know it well, I said. She looked at me without blinking. We bled there once. I didn't ask who we were. The desert already held enough ghosts without me inviting more. Instead, I studied the cut, the loose stones above, the way shadows deepened just beyond the bend. A man who thought the land was his servant would walk right into its teeth. We set our trap together. She wove a mat of cedar twigs, delicate but false strong, a deceit of nature itself. I piled stones into shelves above the passage, patient as guilt waiting to fall. We said little, because words would not hold the rocks in place. When the first rider came, he came fast and foolish. His mule spooked at the narrowing and shouldered against the wall. The man grabbed for balance, found the false mat, and dropped like a sack of grain. Stones followed, punishing him with the weight of centuries. His scream was short, cut off by dust. The second man fared no better. By the time the echoes died, the rest had pulled back, their courage spooked out of them. We listened to the silent stretch, broken only by a crow's coarse laughter somewhere above. They'll circle, Nayeli said. They'll try, I answered. But the desert doesn't play favorites. It only waits for mistakes. We climbed to higher ground, scrambling up a goat path sharp with shale. My lungs burned, and every muscle begged for my horseback. But the thought of McGraw's sneer kept me moving. At the ridge, we lay belly down, watching dust plumes reform into riders with new plans. Why do you fight them? Nayeli asked suddenly, her voice low but cutting. You are not Apache. You could walk away. Leave me. Leave this. Lef. Her words struck like a whip, because they weren't accusation, they were truth. I could walk. I could turn back to the towns where whiskey dulled memory, and a man's silence bought him distance from the past. But I had burned that road behind me the day I traded my horse for her life. I fight them, I said slowly, because once I fought the wrong people. I fight them because I'm tired of running from the man I was. She studied me, her expression unreadable. Then, almost too quiet to hear, good. Then perhaps you will live long enough to earn what you traded. We spent the night in the cedar, the desert's cold creeping into our bones. I slept in fragments, waking at every rustle, every whisper of wind through needles. Once, near dawn, I opened my eyes to find her watching me. She didn't look away. In that silence, something passed between us, fragile as the first light, but real enough to warm a man who thought his heart had frozen long ago. By morning, the storm of pursuit had quieted. We set out again, angling west toward country she knew better than I ever would. She moved with the land, reading its signs the way a preacher reads scripture. She paused to touch a rock, to taste the wind, to listen to birds. I followed, clumsy and heavy, learning that survival was not about conquest but about listening. When we paused at a spring, she finally spoke. My people say every man carries two trails inside him, one that runs toward death, one that runs toward life. You cannot walk both. You must choose. And you? I asked. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. I walk the one that keeps me free. I wanted to tell her freedom was a word I no longer trusted, that I had seen too many men use it as an excuse to chain others. But I kept silent. Some truths were heavier than water, and we had miles yet to go. As the sun bled into another evening, I realized I was no longer running from Silas McGraw. I was running toward something else. Toward her, perhaps. Toward a chance to set down a past that had never stopped chasing me. The land ahead was wide, and the danger greater still. But for the first time in years I felt the stirrings of purpose. And that, more than any rifle or horse, was what might keep me alive. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second, and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from so I don't feel so alone out here. By the time the sun climbed a hand's width above the ridge, a seam of dust underlined the far mesa. I saw the riders first. I had learned to read distance like a banker reads a ledger, every figure meaning risk. 10, maybe 12. The wind in the junipers made a thin, lonely whine. I steadied a dented spyglass. Brass warm, lens nicked, good enough for half-truths at half a mile. The lead rider sat easy, coat lifted by heat. Even through the glass, I felt the bruise of that posture. Silas McGraw rode as if the country owed him interest. Nayeli stood a few steps behind. She had looped the beaded cord the camp mothers gave her around her wrist, but hadn't tied it. "Well?" she asked. "Silas," I said. The name tasted of iron. "And men who aren't paid by the hour." Her face went still. I could not blame the stiffness in her shoulders. We were too close to the foothills for clean escape, and too far from the Apache camp to count on help. Last night the elders let Nayeli sleep inside their ring, but not at its heart, a small distance with a large meaning. Trust is not a blanket, it is a thin quilt. "They'll come to the Narrows," I said. I pointed with 2 fingers, the old cavalry habit. "Only cut through if you're riding heavy." "And if they aren't?" she asked. "They will be," I said. "Silas never rides light when there's profit. Word out of Tucson is boxes, carbines. He'll think of money, not speed." I hesitated. I would have. "Lo." Her eyes tightened. "You would have," she echoed. "I was a soldier," I said. "Before I learned anything about honor not stamped on a payroll, I learned what men do with a shipment and a timetable." "You learned it by riding with them," she said. From the ravine, old Mackay climbed into view, red cloth on his arm. "Bad wind," he said to Nayeli. Then in English to me, "We take the women north. The old ones follow. You come if your heart knows where it belongs." Lo. If I left the pass, Silas would run guns through and circle back for bodies. "If I give him that throat," I said, "he'll swallow the valley." Mackay studied me. "You know the man's teeth." "I know the jaw that works them." Nayeli's hands nodded. "You knew him close," she said. "I pulled him from a creek," I answered. "We shared thin coffee and thick lies. He spoke about owning the world by 40. I mistook appetite for strength. 1. What do you think now? That I owe a debt to anyone who paid for my mistake." She looked at me like a card you can't decide to keep or throw. "Go close the pass," she said. "We'll move the old women." "I'll need time," I said. "And a stone that looks like mercy." "Mercy is heavy," Mackay replied. "Choose a big one." We split. The women ghosted north along a waterless trail. I took the ridge, shale crunching under my boots. The Narrows cut the mesa, a slot no wider than a wagon, choked with roots, and a rusted can with bullet holes. At the upper lip I found it a slab, 2 men tall, undercut by rain. I jammed a lever, heaved. The stone groaned, remembered gravity, and toppled slow as confession, fast as rumor. It slammed into the throat with thunder and dust. By late afternoon, the riders slid into the lower basin. Shadows long, Silas at the point. He stood in the stirrups, saw the blockage, and smiled like a gambler at a marked deck. "Ethan Cole," he called, voice oil smooth. I thought it smelled like regret. I stepped from behind rock with a borrowed carbine, 1 in the chamber, 5 in the tube. "I traded the smell of you for fresh air," I said. "Wind keeps shifting." Silas's smile thinned. "You always did talk like a man who thinks words change a balance sheet." He traced the rockfall. "Men can climb. Money can wait. Lower. Your men won't like the count when they're halfway up and I start picking," I said. The riders dismounted, reluctant as sinners approaching a river. The canyon swallowed small sounds and returned them bigger. "Where is the girl?" Silas asked. "Where she chooses to be," I answered. "Not with you." Silas cocked his head. "You paid a horse and a gun for a woman. That's not romance. That's poor investment. Tell her about Bitter Spring. Tell her who suggested 3 exits in 1 fire. Vest." The scar in my chest split its seam. "I told her," I said. "I told her what I was." Silas laughed. "You? Confess? That's rich." 2 men started up the wall, boots scraping, hands seeking holds. The others fanned with rifles up, eyes white where courage thins. I lifted the sights to Silas's chest. 1 pull could close a chapter, but I wanted to win without proving Silas right. I wanted Nayeli to look at me and not see a ledger kept in red. I fired not at flesh, at stone 2 feet from Silas. The bullet sparked and screamed. Men flinched. "You're a coward," Silas said. "I'm learning mercy," I answered, heavier than I thought. A wild shot came back, young nerves, bad aim. The echo still ran when another sound entered, far and regular, a drum written by hooves, ponies at a lope. Silas heard, turned, did the fast math. He didn't say, Apache. He dropped to the base, cursed, and slashed his hand. Mount up! North Trail! Riders wheeled. On the rim, young men appeared hair-bound, faces set to flint. They did not shout. I did not shoot backs. I held my silence like a rope in a flood. When the last rider vanished into hammered light, the air shed a weight. One youth rode down and studied the rockfall and the brass at my boot. "You could have killed him," he said in careful English. "Yes. You didn't. Number." The boy jerked his chin north. "Nayeli waits with the old ones. She is angry. Is she safe?" "Yes. She lifted more than her weight when the grandmother fell." "Thank you. Mackay says come. Stone can be mercy, and mercy can be stone." We moved under cottonwoods at a dry bend. Mackay kneaded juniper oil into the grandmother's calf. Women knelt around a circle of stones not yet called fire. Nayeli stood apart, eyes on the ridge. She walked to meet me. "You meant to kill him," she said. "Yes," I answered. "Then I chose not to." "Because you fear our judgment?" "Because I want to earn it," I said. "I want to buy tomorrow with something other than blood. The road out of the man I was runs through mercy." She searched my face and did not find an easier lie. "He will come again," she said. "I know. He will bring guns." "I know. And your past with him is the road he will ride." Then we break the road. Mackay rose. "Tomorrow we speak of Red Mesa," he said. "We'll need eyes that see far and a man who can stand in the first arrow's shadow." He looked at me. "You wish to be that man?" "I wish to be different," I said. "Sometimes wishing must wear a body." Her gaze didn't soften, but something in it unlatched a fraction. "You fired and did not take the life," she said. "I will put that on the scale. It won't weigh enough today." "No," she agreed, "but scales change with what you add." We worked while the light thinned. I helped the grandmother to her blanket. I lifted a flat stone and found a seep, shared it by the palmful until canteens were less empty. Night spread. I lay with my back to a cottonwood. Across the circle, Nayeli mended a torn hem. Sleep came thin. I woke to owls, and once to my name in my head. Dawn came like a tired woman with a basket. In that gray, Mackay touched my boot. "We go," he said. "Red Mesa waits." Nayeli was already up, hair braided, eyes guarded. She looked at me long. I rolled my blanket and slung it. South, the pass lay like a closed throat. I touched the carbine, then let my hand fall. "Today," I told the morning, "I will carry a different weight." The breeze cooled the sweat at my neck. I stepped into the light that was waiting to test every word I had said. "Take care. Stay safe out there." "Hey there. Friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." Red Mesa rose out of morning like a red anvil waiting on the hammer of noon. From far off, the tabletop seemed as smooth as a prayer stone, but up close it broke into knife ledges, wind-carved alcoves, goat trails thin as breath. We moved in silence because silence was the only friend that could keep up. Mackay led, feet reading the slope like Braille. Tsi and Nantan, both still young enough to laugh at danger and old enough to bury it, shaded ahead. I carried the borrowed carbine and a heavier thing that had no sling, the choice I made yesterday not to put a hole in Silas McGraw when his chest sat easy in my sights. At the second switchback, Mackay knelt and pried up a flat rock. Beneath, a dry pocket coughed chalk dust. "Cash," he said. "From the year soldiers hunted us like coyotes." He raised a coil of rawhide line, a tin dipper, and a pouch of river chalk ground fine as flour. He brushed 3 marks on the stone, pale and secret, for our own to follow, not for theirs. We climbed again. The light sharpened the mesa into teeth. Heat slipped inside our shirts, counting our ribs. At a notch cut by winter floods, the land offered a choice. A right path easy as greed, a center path that rewarded pride, and a left path that punished men who thought they knew her. "He will choose center," Mackay said without looking at me. "Men like him talk to their horses about courage." Do. Nayeli crouched and traced the winds with her palm. The afternoon will lean toward us, she murmured. Smoke will lie down and confess. We found our basin near the top, a shallow red bowl with low spines of rock and a wagon cut on the western lip. It would hold men the way a palm holds marbles. We set to work. Tse and Nantan dragged brush to a shelf where two bows could sleep. Nayeli and I rolled deadfall until a left wheel would kiss a rut we invented. Mackay mixed chalk with spit and drew a thin white line along a lip of stone, bright only to those who already knew to see it. No foot passed, he said, not even ours, once the speaking starts. My hands remembered ugly skills and tried to teach them different work. I laid rifles where their shadows would not betray them. I showed, say, the slow arithmetic of breath. Count to 60 without numbers, I told him. If you shoot too quick, you make a man brave. If you wait, you make him doubt. Lo. He gave me a look that measured two truths at once. How many breaths did you take before you didn't kill him? Not enough, I said. More than I used to. We ate under a leaning slab, jerky salted like old sorrow, and green pads of prickly pear that cooled the mouth. Heat lay on the stone like a feverish hand. Mackay said, "A hawk kills when he must, and rests when his belly is honest. A man has another choice. Rest because his soul is tired of counting ghosts." 1. I was busy tallying roots, ranges, wind, and the places where pride would show its throat. Usefulness rose in me without the stink of cruelty, and that scared me more than any bullet I'd ever met. The first rumor of riders came as a smell, sweat, leather, dust rubbed warm. Tse slid back along the shelf and put down fingers. 10, then 3. He tipped his palm like a pouring cup. Heavy. Guns. They entered one by one, then in twos, the wagon creaking. Canvas arched like a back praying to be spared. Silas rode second, not first, which told me he had learned to send another man's luck ahead of his own. His men wore easy smiles, the kind bought with new pay and lies about tomorrow. Silas raised a hand. The string stopped. His gaze climbed the ring. Brush, shadow, rock, silence. I felt his attention pass near my stone and move on. "Pretty," he said. Somebody set a table. Then, our answer was a raven's cough. Tse's first arrow stapled the driver's hat to the canvas without drawing blood. Nantan's second cut the left mule's strap. The wagon lurched, wheel climbed, snapped, and slumped like a drunk who promised he'd stop. Then the rifles spoke single, separated, patient. 2 riders dropped. Another horse went down screaming and made a man under it suddenly honest with the earth. I kept Silas in the bead. When his pistol swung toward the brush hiding Tse, I fired and took his hand sideways. The gun clattered. I did not shoot again. The refusal burned like a brand pressed to the inside. But it held. "Cole," Silas shouted, "you won't always be above me when you practice virtue." "That's why I'm practicing now," I said, though the wind stole it. He answered with ruthlessness men call cleverness. He tore the wagon canvas, dragged a crate to the rocks, split it with a boot heel. Carbine mouths tumbled out, oiled and hungry. His men dove, not for cover but for power. Then Providence arrived wearing work clothes. The crates patched pitch, brittle from heat, cracked its seal. Rap, per Pascal, per S-plit to dust. A proud fool touched steel to primer too quick. The gray bloom flared sharp, vicious, brief. Hands blistered. Sleeves smoked. Courage broke its ankle and limped. Silas smothered a boy's fire with his vest, cursing like a father who hates the mirror. "Down," Mackay whispered. We stopped. The basin filled with a new sound, men listening to the shape of mercy. For a slow breath, Red Mesa felt like a church, with no roof and too much sky. Silas straightened, face cooled into numbers. "We're leaving," he said. "Count your miracle, Cole. Count careful." He gathered what he could, burned hands, bent pride, a wagon that rolled like a bad thought and signaled the retreat. No one on our side shot a back. Some rules are not kindness. They are fences to keep wolves from discovering they enjoy the taste. No one cheered. We worked the basin back toward innocence, smudged chalk, hid prints, rolled the broken wheel into a crack that time would finish. Only then did Nayeli face me. "You spared the hand," she said, "not the man." "I spared the man in me," I answered. "I don't know if that helps yours." Her mouth thinned, then softened by a hair. "You will speak with my uncle," she said. "He will search your eyes like a scout searches dust. If you are to stand in the first arrow's shadow, he must believe your shadow isn't borrowed." "I'll stand," I said, and my knees believed me about half. We started down. At the tightest kink of trail, my shoulder brushed hers, and neither of us moved away. I told Mackay the true story of Bitter Spring, the shortcut I'd argued for, the fire that made 3 exits into one, the children who ran the wrong way, because I made the right way look like death. "The army never wrote their names," I said. "The ravens will," he answered. "They talk to a god who doesn't read ledgers." We reached the cottonwoods by twilight. The grandmothers gave me that small, sufficient nod reserved for men who hadn't made their day worse. C told a tale about a boy who asked a mountain for courage and received good knees and better breath instead. Before dawn, I woke to Nayeli praying in the old language. I heard my name, the word for scales, and the word for crossing. I turned my face to give the words space to do their work. Morning came thin and pink, an unsteady newborn. We scattered the coals, shouldered small loads, and prepared our courage the way poor men prepare bread. With care, with both hands. The road to her uncle ran along a dry arroyo that remembered rain better than men remember mercy. I touched the carbine, then let it go. "Ready?" Mackay asked. "Ready is a word that lies," I said. "But I can walk." We walked toward judgment, and maybe toward a bridge no map could promise. Behind us, Red Mesa kept our secrets and our signatures like a ledger balanced by blood and mercy in equal stubborn lines. We did not win a war. We bought an afternoon in which the old could breathe, and the young could remember how to laugh. And maybe that is all a man is allowed, one purchased hour to tilt the scale, to prove that mercy can bite as hard as iron and stone. If you're watching on television, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters. The smoke from Red Mesa did not rise. It lay low like a wounded thing. I walked the basin with Mackay, brushing ash over prints, resetting stones so the land would not remember the fight. Twice I pocketed brass, as if they were words I could not leave behind. We had won only in the frontier sense. Alive, and the guns had not crossed the ridge. Yet the ledger refused to close in black. 2 boys lay under blankets that did not move. A grandmother hummed a tune with no words left. Nayeli moved among the wounded, dipping cloths into juniper and willow. She worked with the steady cruelty of necessity. When I came near, she neither smiled nor turned away. She handed me a gourd, water. I held it to a boy's mouth and watched the throat work. By evening, the mesa cooled. Ravens stitched commas across a copper sky. Mackay and I levered the broken wheel into a crack where winter would finish it. "Good," Mackay said. "Stones dislike remembering our foolishness." "Yes." "He'll be back," I said. "Yes. He is a man who eats tomorrow to fatten today." We broke camp at gray dawn and walked the cottonwood trail to the uncle's camp. The uncle stood where the wind lost its anger, hair black as wet stone, face cut from a stricter quarry than Mackay's. His gaze found me and did not move. Nayeli spoke first, quick and spare in her own tongue. The blocked pass, the carbine spill, the fire that was not thunder, the backs not shot. She did not speak for me, she spoke about me. The uncle listened and let the weight settle. When she finished, he pointed to a trampled patch. "Stand there," he said to me. I stood. "What are you?" the uncle asked. "A hired man trying to be a better one." "What were you?" "A soldier who made fast choices, and called them courage." "What did they cost?" "Names I never learned. Children I never buried." "What will slower choices cost?" "Time," I said. "And probably blood, but maybe not the wrong kind." "We do not need a white hero," the uncle said. "We need a bridge that does not break when horses cross." "I can be wood," I said. "I can be rope. I have been a blade long enough." I was sent away to wait. Women passed with bowls. Boys carried sticks for a fire that would not smoke. At noon the uncle called me back. "Stay," he said. "Learn our words with your mouth." Take no pay while you learn. Listen more than you speak. When the man who eats tomorrow returns, stand where the first shadow falls. I will. You will fail sometimes. I know. The days that followed had the shape of repair. I put my back under poles, my hands under kettles, my shoulder under wheels. I learned to hold a baby like a promise. At night, I asked forgiveness without expecting absolution, and woke without hating myself. Nayeli and I spoke in small pieces. I apologized. She said, I heard you already when you fired and did not finish. We rode the perimeter, reading sign. She showed the difference between a hurry and a decision in a hoofprint. I showed how iron bites rock, and how a wagon's echo betrays distance. On the 7th day, a rider came the boy with the burned sleeve. He stopped at the edge of camp and lifted both hands. I come without a gun, he said. The man you spared will come south again. He drinks with a sheriff who does not listen well. What do you want? The uncle asked. To live long enough to stop wanting to be brave in the wrong ways. You may drink, then go, the uncle said. Tell your friends the land is tired of the same hoofprints. When the boy rode away, I felt the old iron rise and forced it down. Mercy did not make me lighter. It made me careful where I stepped. Nayeli said, we don't have to be saints. We only have to be stubborn in the direction of good. Word spread that Silas was buying horses like a gambler who had found a vein of gold. Freight moved at odd hours. Strangers asked questions with hats low. I helped draw a plan around the uncle's caution and Makai's patience. A ridge signal meaning west, 3 fires on the flats meaning now, a breaking of wagons in a dry wash that would not echo gunfire. On the day chosen, a windstorm walked the basin and undid the signals. The uncle called it off. I learned, a plan is not courage unless it knows how to wait. I banked the coals and said nothing sour. That evening I saddled 2 ponies and asked Nayeli to ride. We climbed a rim and watched the valley hold its breath. When I was a girl, I thought love was a fire that burns everything clean, Nayeli said. Then I learned fire is also a thief. What now? Love is a stubborn river, she said. It carves stone the long way. It promises direction, not speed. I thought of women in cowboy love stories, written as lanterns men carry. She was not a lantern. She was a horizon. We turned for home as the first star tested itself. Halfway down, she touched my wrist, the beaded cord still wrapped there. Keep it, she said. Knots are made after storms, not before. We rode into camp as fires woke. The uncle looked at me and saw I would not run from the next shadow. If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. Days lengthened. Men in town spoke softer when Apache boys rode in to trade. The sheriff at Greer Station had fewer friends. Silas came south again and found his circle smaller. He did not attack. He tested. One evening the uncle said, Bridge, stay or go. Decide before the moon's third rise. Good. I walked the perimeter and listened to the small sounds a camp makes when it is safe enough to breathe. I will stay, I told the uncle. If you will have a bridge that sometimes needs repair. We will repair you, the uncle said, and you will repair us. That is how 2 banks become 1 crossing. Next morning we saddled 2 ponies. Nayeli mounted the red mare who bit everyone else and let her do anything. I took the dun who disliked rivers and had learned to accept them. We rode out with empty packs and no speeches. We climbed a low ridge and looked back once. The world opened into a distance that saves a person with small things. Water shared, words kept, a hand not shot, a bridge offered, a beaded cord worn where a pulse answers. Behind us lay war, grief, and learning. Ahead lay the long work of a Wild West love story told without hurry. We did not know if the sheriff would bend or if Silas would break, only that today's road let us ride side by side without lying about what had been paid. When the sun leaned west, we found the old stage road and let the horses amble. Nayeli hummed the tune the grandmother had lost. I felt the ache of happiness, the kind that knows what it cost and chooses it anyway. We did not speak vows. We spoke inventory. Water, bread, the map in my head, the map in hers. I told her the word for home had started to move. She said, "Good. Words that never move become prisons." The road bent toward a notch of light. We rode into it easy, and the valley beyond welcomed us with the plain grace of space.